Welcome back to JForrest English. I'm Jennifer, and today we're going to read a news article together so you can improve your fluency, add advanced grammar and advanced vocabulary to your speech so you can sound like a native English speaker. Let's get started. First, I'll read the headline. Harry and Meghan, Spotify podcast deal with couple ends. Now let's talk about the article. A joint statement from Harry and Meghan's company and the streaming giant. The streaming giant is who? Based on the headline, who's the streaming giant? That's Spotify. So Spotify is the streaming giant. I wrote that here for you. And just know that if you were to say this, the company and Spotify, you wouldn't say the Spotify because Spotify is a proper name and we don't put an article in front of a proper name unless the name includes the article. But in this case, the company is just called Spotify, not the Spotify. Company and Spotify, the streaming giant, said they had mutually agreed to part ways. So mutually means that both parties said, yes, I want this. Yes, I want this. That is mutual. Now, to part ways is another way of saying to end a relationship. You can use this in a business relationship, such as the relationship with Harry and Meghan and Spotify, but we also commonly use this in personal romantic relationships. For example, let's say Fred is talking to his friend and he could say, my wife and I have decided to part ways. And then the person will say, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Or, oh, what happened? Depending on how well you know Fred, if you're going to ask follow-up questions or not. But if Fred and his wife are parting ways, it's another way of saying they're getting divorced. But it sounds a little less devastating than getting divorced. So we're just parting ways. Now, here you could also say have decided to part ways, and then you could add it was mutual. It was mutual. Saying that our decision to part ways, to separate or to divorce, to end our relationship was mutual. It was mutual. It representing our decision to part ways. It was mutual. So they both said, yes, I want to. Yes, I want to. It was mutual. Now, you could also say it wasn't mutual, and this would imply that either Fred or his wife didn't want to part ways and wanted to remain in the relationship. Let's continue. Spotify confirmed it was not renewing Meghan's podcast, Archetypes. Listen to my pronunciation here. Archetypes. There are three sounds. We have arc. This ends on a K sound. Arc. This is just a schwa sound, as we call it in our throat. Arca. Arca. And then the word types. Archetypes. Archetypes. The name of the podcast is archetype, but this is also a noun in English. An archetype, this is a perfect example of something. For example, Steve Jobs was the archetype of a leader. I'm using the verb to be in the past simple because Steve Jobs is dead. So we use the verb to be in the past simple when someone has died. Now notice here, I have my noun archetype, the archetype, which means the perfect example of a leader. So the archetype of, and then whatever it's the example of. For example, the Empire State Building is the archetype of a skyscraper. So that could be another example. The archetype of, and then whatever the category is. So this is the name of the podcast, but it also has a meaning in the English language. Same spelling, same pronunciation. So the podcast Archetypes, which ran for 12 episodes from August 2022 for a second series. So going back, Spotify confirmed it's not renewing the podcast, which ran for 12 episodes from August 2022 for a second series. Now notice they're using the verb to run. We use this when we're talking about the length of time that a TV series, or in this case, a podcast, is available to the public. Let's take the popular TV show Friends, which is no longer on the air, but you can still watch the old episodes of it. So we could say Friends ran from, and I have no idea when Friends ran from. Do you? So we need the date or the year when Friends started on TV, and then also when it ended. So I'm just going to say, I think it was in the 90s, right? 1992 to 1998. This is not at all accurate. I have no idea if this is correct at all, but Friends ran from, so this is the date, the year that the show became publicly available, and then when it stopped as well. So we use the verb ran. Now, don't worry about taking all of these notes because I summarize everything in a free lesson PDF. So you can look in the description or the comment section for the link to download the free lesson PDF. Let's continue. The contract was estimated to be worth $25 million in late 2020. So at this time in late 2020 would represent later in the year. So January, February, March, that would be early 2020. And then July, August would be mid 2020. And then November, December would be late 2020. I wrote that here for you. And also notice the preposition because you use in with a year in 2022 or in with a month as well. I'm going on vacation in August, but with a specific date, you would use on. So you could say, I'm going on vacation. I'm going on vacation in August. Or you could say in 2024. I'm going on vacation on August 4th. So here, when we have a specific date, so the month and the date, then you would use on. We can use in for the year and in for the month as well. So pay attention to these small words, prepositions, articles, because they're extremely important to be considered fluent and advanced in English. Let's continue. The podcast deal was one of the major commercial agreements the couple entered into after quitting royal duties and relocating to the US in 2020. So notice you enter into an agreement. The sentence structure is slightly different because they're talking about the agreement first, and then they're saying the agreement the couple entered into, which you can absolutely do. So let me write this for you. So the agreement the couple entered into was worth $25 million, for example. Otherwise, you could start with a subject. We entered into an agreement worth $25 million. So pay attention to that sentence structure, but notice that you enter into and then an agreement, whether it comes before or after. So let me highlight there. So here we have agreement, but then the enter into is separated. After quitting. Notice here we have your verb in ing, the gerund verb, because after is a preposition. So of course you need your gerund. So we have preposition plus gerund verb. And after is our preposition. After quitting royal duties and relocating to the US in 2020. So when you relocate, it means you change your location from location A to location B. So you might say, I'm going to relocate in August. I'm going to relocate on August 4th. Same thing. So you're going to change your location from A to B. Now you can use that for yourself personally where you live. You could also use that for your company or even a restaurant. Oh, my favorite restaurant relocated. And now they're all the way on the other side of town. And maybe before they were very close to you, but then they relocated and they're far away. So you're not going to go, even though it was your favorite restaurant. I wrote that example here for you. My favorite restaurant relocated, changed its location from A to B, and now it's a 40-minute drive. Notice here, 40-minute. There's no S, right? Because 40-minute is an adjective that describes drive, which is why there's no S, even though it's plural. So this is an adjective, 40-minute. I'll just put that here for you, 40-minute, and this is an adjective. I hope you're enjoying this lesson. If you enjoy learning English with the news, then I want to tell you about my premium training program, the Finally Fluent Academy. This is where we study native English speakers on TV, YouTube, movies, and the news so you can improve your listening skills of fast English, advance your vocabulary, learn complex grammar, and you'll have me as your personal coach. So you can look in the description for a link on how to join. Let's continue. Archetypes. So remember, this is the name of Megan's podcast. Archetypes saw Megan speak to high-profile figures like Serena Williams and Mariah Carey about stereotypes leveled against women. In December, so here are preposition in, on December 4th, for example, but in December, Archetypes won the top podcast award at the People's Choice Award in Los Angeles. So clearly it was a popular podcast. At the time, what does this represent? Well, our last time reference was in December around the time of the People's Choice Award. So that would be at the time, the last time that is referenced. At the time, Megan wrote, I loved digging my hands into the process. Notice here she said dig into the process. When you dig into something, this is a phrasal verb, and it simply means to learn or to uncover information. So for example, we need to dig into why our sales are down. So we need to just review the information, review the sales, and try to learn why or uncover why something is happening. So she's trying to learn about the process. I loved digging my hands into the process. And notice here, the verbs are all in the ing form. That's because Megan is saying, I love, and love is a verb that uses the gerund. So you have love because it's a verb of preference, and following love, we use the gerund. I loved digging into the process. I loved sitting up late at night. I loved working on the writing. So that's why all the verbs are in the gerund form, because they all follow I loved. But she's just not repeating, I love digging in, I love sitting up. So just to avoid sounding repetitive, she's simply stating the verbs. Digging into the process, sitting up, late at night, in bed, working on the writing and creative. I'll write that as a note for you. Let's continue. When the agreement with Spotify, the streaming giant, with Spotify was first announced, it was billed as a relationship which would produce several series. But in the end, only one materialized. So here it was billed as, this isn't a very common expression, so I'm not going to highlight it for you, but it simply means they labeled it as, or they described it as. That would be the closest one. I don't hear billed as very frequently, so I don't recommend using that. I would say it was described as a relationship which would produce several series. So series of the podcast. A series is made up of a collection of episodes. So on TV, a series would have a number of seasons, and there would be a group of episodes within each season. So maybe there's season 1 and there's 12 episodes. Season 2, 12 episodes. And they release one season every year, or one season every 6 months, for example. So that's what this podcast was supposed to be. It was described as, but in the end, this is talking about in reality, what actually happened. In the end, only one materialized. In this case, materialize is another way of saying happened. Only one happened. Only one was actually produced and aired to the public. So, but in the end, so talking about the reality of what you did compared to what your plan was. For example, I wanted to go to the party, but in the end, I stayed home. So in the end simply is referring to the reality of what happened, whereas this was your plan or your expected result, what you anticipated. And then this is, in the end, this is the reality. But in the end, I stayed home. Let's continue. American media reports suggest the royal couple failed to meet the productivity benchmark required by Spotify. A benchmark is something that you're evaluated against. So perhaps on a language exam, the benchmark is getting 8 out of 10 to be successful. So that's what you're evaluated against. If you get 7 out of 10, well, then you failed because you're below the benchmark. And then if you get 9 out of 10, well, then you succeeded. You're above the benchmark. So the reports suggest that they didn't meet that benchmark. Now, but the reports simply suggest it. It doesn't mean it's true. So when you say the reports suggest, there's definitely an element of uncertainty. It's not a fact for sure. So when someone suggests something, they're just saying it. It's not 100% true. So the reports suggest the royal couple failed to meet the productivity benchmark required by Spotify and therefore wouldn't be receiving the full value of the contract. Since splitting, remember there was that more polite way to describe it you learned at the beginning? Since splitting from the royal family, we could say, since parting ways from the royal family. So here, they're not talking about the contract at this moment. They're not talking about Spotify. They're talking about when Harry and Meghan decided to part ways from the rest of the royal family, the king, the queen, and then the brother William as well. So to part ways is the more polite, softer, gentler way of saying it. And then splitting is another way, a more blunt way of saying it, splitting. So whole and then split. So that's a casual way we can say that in a relationship, remember Fred, and he said his wife and him are parting ways, and it was mutual. Fred could also say, my wife and I split up. Is the phrasal verb to split up is another way of saying separating, getting divorced, or simply ending a relationship. So someone could ask you, oh, are you still with Tony or Maria? And that's your boyfriend or girlfriend. And you can say, no, we split up. We split up. So we ended our relationship. We split up. And then you can say we split up in January or we split up on January 5th if you want to be very specific. Remember, we are practicing our preposition. So that's a very casual, blunt way of saying it. And then a softer, more delicate way of saying it would be, we decided to part ways. But it was mutual. We both agreed to it, but it was mutual. Or you can just be blunt and say, we split up. We split up. So since splitting from the royal family, Harry and Meghan have looked to capitalize on their global fame. So when you capitalize on something, you try to get the benefit of it, and the of it being their global fame. So they have all of this fame, and then Harry and Meghan could be discussing, well, how can we capitalize on that? How can we benefit from that? So to capitalize on something. Notice that preposition on, because in my example, I also said, how can we benefit from it? Benefit from, capitalize on. So prepositions in English is just a matter of memorization. Have looked to capitalize on their global fame in order to become financially independent. So their attempt to capitalize on their global fame in order to become financially independent, all of that is summarized as that. So that representing this last point. That has included a multi-million-dollar content deal with Netflix and Harry's huge contract with Penguin Books, which has already produced his autobiography, Spare. And actually, I have another lesson on Learn English with the News where we review when Harry's book, Spare, became available to the public. So you can look in the description for the link on that video as well. And that's the end of our article. So what I'll do now is I will read the article from start to finish, and this time you can focus on my pronunciation. So let's do that now. Harry and Meghan, Spotify podcast deal with couple ends. A joint statement from Harry and Meghan's company and the streaming giant said they had mutually agreed to part ways. Spotify confirmed it was not renewing Meghan's podcast Archetypes, which ran for 12 episodes from August 2022 for a second series. The contract was estimated to be worth $25 million in late 2020. The podcast deal was one of the major commercial agreements the couple entered into after quitting royal duties and relocating to the US in 2020. Archetypes saw Meghan speak to high-profile figures like Serena Williams and Mariah Carey about stereotypes leveled against women. In December, Archetypes won the Top Podcast Award at the People's Choice Award in Los Angeles. At the time, Meghan wrote, "I love digging my hands into the process, sitting up late at night in bed, working on the writing and creative." When the agreement with Spotify was first announced, it was billed as a relationship which would produce several series. But in the end, only one materialized. American media reports suggest the royal couple failed to meet the productivity benchmark required by Spotify and therefore wouldn't be receiving the full value of the contract. Since splitting from the royal family, Harry and Meghan have looked to capitalize on their global fame in order to become financially independent. That has included a multi-million-dollar content deal with Netflix and Harry's huge contract with Penguin Books, which has already produced his autobiography, Spare. If you like this lesson, then make sure you subscribe so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. And you can get this free speaking guide where I share 6 tips on how to speak English fluently and confidently. You can get it right from my website or look in the description for the link to download this for free. And remember I mentioned that I created another lesson where we reviewed the news article talking about Harry's new book, Spare? Well, you can watch that lesson right here. I've also posted the link in the description, so you can look in the description or click on the screen to watch that lesson right now.